Hello and welcome back to Special Ed on Special Ed. Today I have a great guest, Dr. Matt, or Dr. Matthew Zakreski, if you want to be formal, who's a distinguished clinical psychologist with a focus on neurodiversity, which is crucial for parents navigating the complexities of raising children with disabilities, because let's face it, most of us are neurodiverse. Dr. Matt specializes in supporting neurodivergent individuals, including those with ADHD, giftedness, dyslexia, and autism, offering relevant insights for parents. And I kind of put that emphasis on gifted because I feel like that runs a lot with the ADHD and the autism and even the dyslexia. So that's an important component. Dr. Matt's renowned for his global speaking engagements and brings a wealth of knowledge on neurodiversity to the table. He's the co-founder of Neurodiversity Collective, which provides therapy and coaching tailored to the needs of neurodivergent individuals and their families. His approach is grounded in practical strategies and support, which directly benefit parents seeking effective ways to aid their children's development and learning. So thank you for joining me, Dr. Matt. How are you doing today?
I am doing awesome. I'm excited to be here and talk to you.
Great. I'm so psyched you're here. But before we say another word, I have to play my disclaimer because I'm a lawyer and I can't do anything without my disclaimer. So here it goes. The information in this podcast is provided for general informational and entertainment purposes only and may not reflect the current law in your jurisdiction at the time you're listening. Nothing in this episode creates an attorney-client relationship, nor is it legal advice. Do not act or refrain from acting on the basis of any information included in or accessible through this episode without seeking appropriate legal or other professional advice on the particular facts and circumstances at issue from a lawyer or service provider licensed in your state, country, or other appropriate licensing jurisdiction. Okay, Dr. Matt, I love everything that you do, but I know it stems from your own personal journey. So I would love it if you would give us some background on how your journey from whenever up until the Neurodiversity Collective.
I grew up as a gifted kid in New Jersey, and like a lot of other gifted kids, a lot of stuff came very easy to me. Some stuff was way harder than it should have been. I ended up getting diagnosed with ADHD in high school, which honestly explained a lot.
It always does.
It always does, right? It's like, gosh, why is everybody else playing the video game on easy? Why am I playing it on hard? Oh, wait, my brain works differently, huh? And I come to this conclusion that if I ever got the chance to do this work, I wanted to work with kids like me, and even someone who grew up in it, I didn't know what I didn't know, right? I was masking all the time. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that thing, or that was a word. I thought everybody felt that.
Yeah, way. Explain masking. I was so thrilled to find a label for it. I mean, I know a lot of people don't like labels, but like a word.
I say this all the time. Labels are powerful. It matters that you're a zebra, not a weird horse, right? The zebras and horses look very similar, right? If you saw the it's the same animal, right? Oh, no, they're totally different. But so many of us who grow up in a neurotypical paradigm assume neurotypical is right. Assume neurotypical is what you're supposed to do. And the world is built to reinforce that narrative. So for people like us who don't fit those vibes because our brains are different, we sort of struggle more than everybody else. And that cumulative struggle bogs us down eventually, right? That bill comes due at some point.
Yes. And I think, sorry to interrupt, but I think that that's a really good point because sometimes it can be the death of a thousand cuts. It's not just that this one thing is hard. It's that all the little pieces that are just a little more of a struggle or sometimes a lot more of a struggle, they add up. And I think a lot of kids, especially those who are gifted, can handle a lot more. So we think, they can handle more, so we'll give them more. But all that does is weigh them down even harder.
Uh-huh.
That's why, you're like, yep, that sounds right.
So much.
Yeah.
All the things.
Well, I mean, I get students or clients who, their child, the school will say they're doing great though. They're challenged or they're doing their work great. And the parents are saying, but they come home and fall apart. Like they barely get off the bus and they are a mess. And that's the cumulative stress of making it through the day because they're putting so much energy into just getting through the day that they can't handle the rest of their day.
Right. And masking is a part of that. Masking is one of the extra weights. When I work with kids, it's like every kid in your school has books in their backpack. You have more books in your backpack and they're books that nobody else can see.
Yeah.
Growing up as a boy in the 90s, I mean, like professional was the thing, right? Yeah, everybody wanted to know if I could smell what the rock was cooking, and it never made any sense to me. And I would go to like sleepovers because, you have friends and you were like, they're like, oh my God, can you believe the WWF stuff? And it's like, I mean, it's clearly fake, guys.
This is not a documentary.
I have nothing against professional wrestling. I think it's great. But just, I would leave exhausted because I was playing a character.
Yeah.
And the worst thing about playing a character is when you feel like you don't have a choice, right? Like your boss comes up to you and you got to play the happy employee for 10 minutes. That's one thing. But to like the places you're supposed to let your guard down and be your authentic self as a friend or a family member or a partner or whatever, and you can't do it in those spaces, I mean, goodness me, that's really just, it's like poking a hole in the bottom of the boat.
Yeah. It's like you can see behind the curtain all the time. And so like those things like illusions or kids' magic tricks, at birthday parties, I remember when I was little, I'm like, but that's what he's doing, or that's what they're doing. And it has nothing to do with like, being smart or not smart. It's just you're factual and you're direct and you can see behind the curtain. You're not, I don't know. I don't know if it's like being hyper aware. I don't know what that is, but I hear what you're saying about that. Like, well, of course it's fake. No one else knew, like you just think it's normal that everybody knew that. I don't know if it's an inability to suspend reality or what it is.
And it's a lot of those things. I mean, somebody once described autism to me as a person who is categorically incapable of bullshit. And I was like, that's autism, man.
That's a great definition.
If I like it, I love it. If I hate it, I loathe it.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't interest me, I'm not going to do it. And there's a certain purity to that is kind of lovely. We all have to go along to get along, right? But sometimes your neurodivergence says, I'm not going to do that. And it's kind of great. We also just need to give people the skills to tap into it when it's appropriate. It can't be the all the time thing, but it can be this is really important to me thing. And I'm going to tap into it now because I need it. So I work with kids like me. It started just in the mental health side, right? Like how do you teach people functioning, resilience, social skills, things that you need to navigate the world? Because like, honestly, the kids I work with, they're going to learn calculus. They're going to figure that out. That's awesome, right? Write a great paper. They can do a science experiment. But I was seeing all these kids who were getting to high school or getting to college and falling apart because they didn't have the inner working. They didn't have the scaffolding to navigate those challenging moments, right? To get to a place where it's like, what do you do when you have conflict with your roommate? That was never a class you took in high school. That was a thing you had to learn.
They don't, that's not stuff that they teach. And I think that there's this misconception that everyone will learn that just by existing in the world. Where was your cliff? What was your college experience, that transition when, whether it was college or high school or, because everybody has them, right? So, or the real world. What do those transitions look like for you?
There's a phenomenon in the field. It's called the performance cliff, right? And the idea is that if you are X smart, sooner or later school gets harder than you are smart. Now, neurotypical kids hit that ledge a lot earlier. So they develop study skills and resiliency skills and asking for help and hitting the grind. Gifted kids and other neurodivergent kids don't hit that till much later. So you don't have to learn to study before 10th grade. But by the way, now all the things you have to learn how to study, because now you're failing for the first time ever, is you have to learn how to study 10th grade level material, not 3rd grade level material.
And all that teaching's done, right? Your school environment isn't teaching it anymore.
And the teacher's like, well, you should know this. It's like, I never had to learn it.
Right.
If I grew up in a house that spoke Mandarin and I never had to take Mandarin classes, oh my gosh, I have to learn formal Mandarin in high school. I just learned, from my grandmother, right? It's a wildly different experience.
Right.
In school, at that point, shame kids for what they don't have, rather than, where they are and supporting them upward.
Yes.
Right. So I hit my performance cliff in 8th grade, as many people do. 7th and 10th grade is sort of the sweet spot there.
Yeah.
And it's cool because it's one of the few things in all of educational psychology where we can point out and say, we know this is going to happen. We can actually be proactive about something. I can't treat you for a manic episode until you have a manic episode, right? Psychology is fundamentally reactive, right? It's like, oh man, you're struggling. I'll help you struggle less But this is the thing where it's like, you want to know the justification for gifted education? It's this cliff that kids are going to hit in 8th grade, right? And the psychological, emotional, social distress that comes with that. I mean, if we can take that burden from 2 families, then goodness, it's worth it.
Right.
Right. That's got to push kids where they are challenged so they learn those skills, right? Because this stuff is about so much more than Johnny can do multivariate calculus in his spare time. That's awesome and important and neat. But without the scaffolding and support of a appropriate targeted educational system, it's really just a party trick.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you're talking about the performance cliff, it's also incredibly damaging to children's self-esteem because they're at a stage where they've been quote unquote smart. And now suddenly it's like they're not doing their work, right? Because they're saying, well, you didn't study because you didn't study properly, or you didn't do the work properly. And again, as you're saying, it's because they weren't taught those things along the way and there's no one to teach them now. So, how could you expect anything less than that?
I mean, absolutely, right? And I'll even take it another step, right? I'll put that, so those same kids, right? Because you're neurodivergent and you don't hit the neurotypical monoculture, increasingly the things that give you value in your own perception are the things your brain enables you to do. If you're not the smart kid, who the hell are you? Right? If you're not the straight A's, if you're not the Einstein, if you're not that guy or that girl or that person, I mean, there's a fusion of self with gifted identity that happens because think about the things that are valued in elementary schools, middle schools, all across the country. Athletic talent, class clown, being a snappy dresser, being like socially adventurous, like wanting to go on dates. Like these are things that gifted kids by and large tend to struggle with.
Yeah.
Right. So increasingly the thing that makes you important and valuable and reinforced is your intellect, is your ability to get good grades. And if that's taken from you, there's no net. It's a catastrophic fall. When I talk about the performance, because I'm one of the researchers who does some work on this, I tell my own story. It's like, it wasn't just that my grades got worse, because they did, but It was the loathing. It was the fear. It was the social isolation, and by the time the resources are mobilized, you are staring up at a mountain and it's really scary. I push a lot of this stuff, and getting back to the power of labels, when I see kids in therapy in 8th grade, 9th grade, and the parents are like, everything was so easy for them. No, it's not. What is this? Is it TikTok's fault somehow? I feel like TikTok's fault. I'm like, there's actually a term for this in the literature. They're not the only kids who dealt with this. And, because there's this wonderful shortcut our brains take called the fundamental attribution error, where we see a behavior and we don't have context. We assume it's a reflection of the person's self, right? If you run late for our podcast interview, I think to myself, well, Dana clearly doesn't care about me. What an unprofessional person she is, right? But if you shoot me a text message saying, hey, I got stuck in traffic, I'll be there as soon as I can, my brain immediately switches to there was a context. But the problem is that we always know our own context. So you be sitting there like, well, I'm stuck in traffic, right? I'm on the Merritt Parkway. The Merritt Parkway always has traffic.
Right.
So I can get home any faster than I can. And you understand your behavior is justified by the context you have, right?
Yes.
Other people don't know that. So they assume it's something deficient about you.
Yes.
Right.
Well, and I think it's also that extreme. You're going from being incredibly successful to a complete failure. That doesn't happen, right? In your brain, in your mind, right? Because you're like, I don't understand why this isn't working. I don't understand why what I'm doing isn't working. And as you said, with the social piece, which I love, what I hear all the time is the kid is doing really well. Their grades are really well, blah, 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 but they don't have any friends. And if you're in middle school and you don't have any friends, that's a problem, because that really is when kids learn so much of that social component and how to deal with each other. I mean, it's awful because they have raging hormones, and it's just a whole, yeah, exactly. God love anyone who wants to work in a middle school, and the people who do love it, right? Like the people who work in middle school are like, this is great. Like, you couldn't pay me. Same with high school. So, yes, I get it. Some kids are loners. But if they don't have friends and they don't have a social life, you have to look at that very, very seriously, because it doesn't matter what their grades are. If a child doesn't know how to create relationships with another person, whether they want to or not, at some point in life, they're going to have to. So, it's not about, oh, they're a loner, they don't really like anybody. Well, of course they don't like anybody because they feel weird. They feel different. They can't do it. And if we don't foster those relationships and teach children how to have them, and it's great that not most, but a lot of kids can do that. And that's wonderful. And some of it comes easy to them. But for those for whom it doesn't, it is another weight on their shoulders.
Absolutely. It's like everybody else got the script, but you didn't.
Right.
And you're trying to figure out how to ad-lib your lines. And I was having a conversation with a school principal, this a couple of years ago now, as we were like sort of coming out of COVID and people were coming back to school, right? And he was, I was pushing hard for one of my kids to have like lunch bunch and have some structured opportunities to connect with friends. He's like, I got to tell you, kids these age, they don't want the formal stuff. They just want to hang out. They want to be on the playground. And I was like, that's cool. That's a very neurotypical mindset. Let me tell you this, like, can you imagine if we taught math that way? Kids will just learn it on the school bus, figuring out integers in their spare time, right? They'll go on the internet and practice their mathematical skills. I mean, it's insane.
That's hilarious. Right? And that's a great comeback.
Right. And we've taken, and even if that was an effective way to teach social skills for neurodivergent kids, which the research shows it isn't, we're also sucking all of that time out of school. There's no more recess. Research shows that the amount of time for recess has plummeted by 700%.
Oh, yeah. It's like 10 minutes, right? Like, it's not.
And lunches are smaller now. Lunches are about 25 minutes, right? So if you don't give kids unstructured time to bounce around on the playground or to have lunch with their friends and sort of like stretch out and relax, and we've taken away shop and we've taken away art class and we've taken away music and we've taken away all the things. I mean, schools used to have that sort of like morning runaround time.
Yes.
I go to school, first bell at 7:20, first class is 7:25. Like, and that 5 walking time. Like, there's no wonder kids feel socially out of sync and underskilled because we're not giving them those reps to practice, even if those reps were all the skill training kids needed. Right. So it's, oh my gosh, if they let me build my own school, there would just be a lot more unstructured time because that's where these kids test drive this stuff. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with giving kids structures and skills to build those social emotional learning strategies. Right. And that's a big part of what we do. I give kids those avenues to practice. I give them the tools to be successful in social interactions. Because when you have a group project and your partner's not working, or when you have conflict with your history teacher, or when your roommate wants to bring a girl home and you don't feel comfortable about that, if you don't have the skills to navigate those moments, we are setting you up for that. I would argue we are doing a disservice to our children by not giving them those skills.
Absolutely. And it's funny because I used to be a staunch anti-homeschooler for a variety of ridiculous reasons until I found myself in that world. We took one of our children out of school and we couldn't afford the program we wanted. And for a variety of reasons, we ended up in a homeschooling co-op. And I got to see firsthand, those of us who are not familiar with it are like, well, if you give kids too much freedom, they'll never do anything. If you give them too much time off, they're just going to want to hang out in the cafeteria and just eat with their friends and hang out and do this and be on their phones. And that was so not the experience I had at all. At the time, my son had a computer and a phone, and I found that after even a couple months, he came to me and he's like, okay, Mom, I'm having fun. I get it. But like, when am I going to do school? And I looked at him, I said, you are in 8 classes, 6 of which have academics. Like, not that I believe you learn from other things, but, outdoor education is really important, but that's not what I'm considering an academic. And I said to him, like, what do you want? He's like, no, but that's all fun. I'm having fun. I'm liking it. So I can't, that's not real school. And I thought, what a sad thing. And and then 2 of my other children followed, they wanted to go back. They wanted to go into that environment as well. And they all thrived, like really thrived. and took control of their education. And I didn't have to be on top of them 24/7. And they made good choices. And, they were able to get their work done, and they learned the skills they needed personally to study and to work. And it was fascinating to me because that's not at all what I'd envisioned as a homeschooling world. And, I think we still a lot of the time feel like if the kids aren't saying it's hard, then they must not be learning anything.
Right.
And children can be challenged and enjoying themselves. But I think part of that piece, as you're saying, having those breaks, having that time to say, okay, my brain needs to recharge for a little while now. So I do need to just hang out. And if you don't know how to do that, or there's no one facilitating that, or you don't even have the opportunity, how on earth are you going to be able to perform in other areas of your day?
Well, and I say this all the time, right? I mean, kids, it's not just about how hard it is. It's about how meaningful that challenge is. And it's about, are you pointing kids in terms of challenge that is helping them grow and designed to give them generalizable skills? To me, it's like if you drove your car as fast as you could all the time, right? I drive a Honda Pilot, it's this super dadmobile, right? Ups out at 140 miles an hour. If I drove my Honda Pilot 140 miles an hour all the time, I would get into car accidents, I would get a million traffic tickets, and my engine would explode. That's not, it's
I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah. And you're an attorney.
Right.
So,
That's my legal advice for the day.
That's good, right? No disclaimer needed on that one. But I mean, it's wild to me that schools, and I see this all the time with the gifted kids I serve. So the American education system has a lot of redundancy built into it because most people learn well through repetition, right? So first grade, why are so many gifted kids identified in second grade? Because second grade in many ways is a redo of first grade. There's a lot of material covered, a little bit faster, a little bit more in depth, but it's very similar. And once again, 70% of the population is neurotypical. Cool. Teach to the middle. That's what those kids need. But the gifted kids who are dying at that, like, I don't want to do any more 2-digit addition problems. I want to do something more complicated. But they agitate for, can I do some algebra? Can I do some algebra? Do I get to do some algebra? Finally, school gets so mad, they go, oh, you want harder math? Calculus.
Right. Now I'm going to give you something you can't do.
Right. To prove a point, and it's wild to me that, because then they'll say, well, the kid can't do the calculus. They must not be that smart, but that,
it's just mean.
Right. You're a great attorney. And if I picked you up tomorrow and dropped you at the Supreme Court and said, argue this case, could you do it?
Right. That would be a problem.
It would be a problem. There's a great psychological concept called the Yerkes-Dodson law, right? Everybody has an optimal level of anxiety that helps them learn. If it's too easy, we don't engage. If it's too hard, we can't engage, right? I'm very good at what I do. And if you give me a challenging kid, that's my right level of anxiety. I'm here for it. But if you give me a floridly psychotic person with substance abuse problems, a unstable living situation, and a hook for a hand, I'm not the right therapist for that person. Thank God that the right therapist does exist for that person. Right. And you're like, well, if you're a good therapist, you should be able to treat this person. Like, it's not my specialty.
Right.
Right.
It's not what I've spent my time learning and practicing and working on.
Yeah. It's got to be aligned with your mission. And it's got to be at that right level of learning for you. Because, the kids who are saying this math is too easy, so I don't want to do it, are the same kids who say, but don't give me something I can't do because then I won't do it. Right. It's got to be that right thing. So I call it the leading edge of learning. Right. That's where kids do their best. And honestly, it's not just neurodivergent kids. It's not just your ADHD or your dyslexic kids, your gifted kids. I think they feel it more acutely. But I say this all the time. The best practices in gifted education are just the best practices in education, full stop.
Right.
This level setting, differentiation, teaching the interest. Every kid in America would do better.
Right.
If we push stuff in. Right. So I feel like when I advocate for my kiddos, I'm really just advocating for better education.
I agree. And when I was a special education teacher and differentiating the instruction was kind of my jam, the teachers who I thought did the best overall were those who were naturally differentiating, right? They weren't just saying, okay, you're on this level, so you're in this group, you're in that, but they were able to address different levels of types of learning or academic levels at the same time. And it's not as hard as it sounds. It's not easy, but for some people, it's quite natural. And that's amazing. Those are the lifers. Those are the great teachers, right? But they're still, right now, they're just teaching to a test. So it's difficult all around. But those are the great teachers for whom that comes naturally, right? They're able to sort of differentiate naturally within their classroom. And then you have these special education teachers who I'm walking around trying to teach people how to do that. And as you said, it benefits everybody.
Yeah.
That's a good thing for any of the students to have those options and those changes. And just because you learn the way that they currently teach doesn't make you smarter, because for kids who are able to respond to this teach to the test thing that we've got going, that doesn't necessarily make you smart. It just means you learn that one way. But there are ways to address the other students as well. So what are some of the strategies that you find you're often given when you're either asked to, work with a classroom or one specific child? How do you sort of address those challenges of, and, I don't know if that's what you still call it. It's what I call it, is teaching to the test. It's, teachers are graded themselves based on, how well the tests come out. And, some kids just aren't going to test well. They're just never going to do that. But so, for when you have to work with a classroom or a school or a specific student, what are some of the more common strategies that you suggest?
Well, so let's talk about teaching to the test, because I think the first question is, does it have to be a test, right? When I do this workshop when I do this, I would say, okay, I was like, I'm going to think of something off the top of my head. All right, let's talk about the new season of Real Housewives, right? Now, how many of you would like to take a written chapter test about the current season of Real Housewives? And some people raise their hand, but they're like, I can do that, right? I know all the people are. I'm like, okay, not all of you raise your hands. How many of you would like to do a PowerPoint presentation about that? And then some other people raise their hands, right? So how many people would like to do a project about that? Maybe design a dress that you saw in Real Housewives, and then some other people raise their hands in that. And then what you inevitably see is some of the people who raise their hands for the test raise their hands again for something else.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, because there are lots of ways to show knowledge and demonstrate mastery.
Yes.
Right. I literally just got out of a consultation session about this, and I was saying, like, one of the kids I work with, he loves science, right? So his school has set it up that every one of his English classes and history classes, things that are traditionally liberal arts, if he can find something in the text that indicates a science experiment, he can do that science experiment and explain how it relates to the plot, and they're good with that.
Wow.
So this kid when they read Tom Sawyer, he literally ran a science experiment. What's the best way to paint a fence?
Wow.
Right? You can't say he doesn't know Tom Sawyer because he read it and he understands that that's the thing Tom Sawyer did. But then he was like, what's the best way to paint a fence? So he painted it vertically. He painted it horizontally. He painted it with the spray paint.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that he presented his data. The school was okay with it. He moves on with his life. I mean, and that's the thing. So teach to the test doesn't have to be a test, right? Let's talk about using rubrics to give kids the opportunity to show their work through the lens of their interests. All the theater kids out there who could absolutely do an interpretive dance to a cotangent function, right? Well, I want to see what that looks like for them, because you've got to learn it to do it in a different way. It's like good parody comes from a place of love. If you're going to do like a good, like superhero mock-up movie, you've got to understand the superhero movie genre first.
Right.
Right.
Right. I was asked once to do a class or a component of a class, which was the civil rights movement through music. And at first I was like, ooh, how's that going to work? Through music, like I know the civil rights movement, but how is that going to work? And it actually ended up not being very hard at all. It's actually a great theme to do through music. And the kids in that class, they were in that class because they were interested in music over time. And I got to tell you, those kids came out of there understanding the civil rights movement way better than any of my kids who just sat through a class. And which was fascinating to me, because looking at the different types of music and the different specific songs and where they came from gave them, I felt, a deeper understanding of the civil rights movement, other than just regurgitating facts and knowing that things happened and they were bad. It was a much deeper understanding. So it is fascinating to me how, when you add that component of what is their interest, what grabs them, it really does ultimately, I think, create a deeper understanding, because they're interested, so they're diving a little deeper. And when you're talking about the different, like a project or an interview or a test or whatever it is, when I was getting my master's in education, that's how my professors worked. Every class, I mean, even my thesis that I had to do, some kids, it was an interview, and those were not easy. It wasn't a lighter way of doing it. You really had to demonstrate it. Some kids did a project. We were given those options so that we could understand ourselves how there are different ways of assessing a child's knowledge and getting them to learn it. If that's your goal, right? Do we want them to pass the test, or do we want them to learn the material? And, at this point also, education has changed so much, because kids don't need to learn the Dewey Decimal System anymore. They've got Google, and they can obtain a lot. No one needs to know Columbus's 3 ships. Like, they just don't need to, because they've got Google. They can find it in 2 seconds. What kids now need to learn is what to do with this vast amount of information that they have access to. How to identify if it's real. That's a good one. I think we should start with that everywhere.
Literacy for everybody. Right. Yay. Right.
And then also, how do you interpret it, and how do you analyze that information once you have it? Do you see that shift in education on, going from, I don't think it's happening enough, because again, the tests, but that's what I think. Critical thinking skills are way more important to me than students memorizing anything.
Absolutely. And it's harder to quantify, because we've decided to make the art of education a science of education. Yes. Outcome data. Like, part of the reason I don't work when I worked in community mental health, the insurance companies would say, you have 12 sessions to cure this kid's OCD.
Oh, great.
We'll pay 12 sessions to do that. I'm like, that's not how any of this works. I mean, if you gave me 12 uninterrupted sessions with somebody who was focused purely on curing their OCD, you might have a puncher's chance at it. But that assumes the OCD is the only thing going on in that person's life,
right?
Which is silly to the point of insulting, to be honest with you, right?
Yes.
So how do we pivot our way through something like that? Because critical thinking is hard to measure, and it's hard to teach properly, and it's hard to assess. And there's a lot of people who have a lot of jobs and a lot of money tied up in the system that exists, right? That things measured and quantified, and that means a good teacher, or that means a good student. And I think if you spend any time with anybody who's on the front lines and doing this work, any classroom teacher, any paraprofessional, any therapist, any school counselor, growth is on the margins, and it's in shades of gray. And a kid might I tell my kids all the time, if you get a B- on the test, but you studied properly, I'll take that every time over you getting an A because you got lucky.
Yeah, I tell my kids that all the time. I never look at their grades. I really don't care about their grades as long as they're doing their best. And if their best is a C-, then I know there's something we need to work on. But I'm not going to be mad about it if they were taking advantage of the supports available to them, if they were, as you said, if they properly studied. When it's the time I get upset is when I'm like, okay, we got the C-, but I know you haven't done anything all semester. That's a different conversation. But I agree with you. I think it has to do more with the amount of effort and energy put in, because everyone has different levels. And, for some kids who have a significant or passionate, I don't want to say hobby, but interest, a significant or passionate interest that is outside of school, maybe they aren't going to get all A's, but they're going to be the best they are over here. And I don't see anything wrong with that either, because I don't think they don't do well if they don't feel good about themselves, if they don't think they have some talent or special skill or whatever it is. So, for example, when you have to ground your kids, and eventually you do, or I did, I would never take away a sport. I would never take away, singing at open mic night on Thursday for one kid, like those are things that build them up, that are part of their world. They may not have their phone for it, but, they're going to be allowed to do that. And I find that really important. It really frustrates me when parents' first response is to take away the one thing that kids are good at or that they enjoy. Well,
and let's strap that in even further than more than just what that looks like at home. Schools are like, oh, well, if this kid can't get the grades in order, then they can't do musical theater anymore. Dude, you think that they are going to school for chemistry class?
Right.
Because they're doing little Shopifyers, or they're making costumes, painting sets. Like school it's about those unstructured moments, those social times, and anybody who pretends otherwise is lying to themselves.
Yes.
Like education is a process, and learning is what kids want to do. They don't want to necessarily go to school to do it, right? And that's why you're seeing more homeschool. That's where you're seeing more, hybrid learning, cyber school, stuff like that, because kids want to be able to do the things that work for them and feel best to them. And if we can point them at an option that allows them to have that, they literally learn better, feel better about themselves, and make more lasting relationships. There's nothing wrong with doing things different way, especially for kids who learn and think differently.
Yeah. I think our entire education system needs a little revamp. I was actually kind of hoping it would fall apart during COVID, but unfortunately we're back to it. So I was hoping that was going to be our silver lining, was that we had to rethink education. And I do think some schools are to some degree, and it'll be interesting to see how and if it evolves. I mean, my favorite line is that, the bells in school, that was created in the 1900s to get children used to factory sounds.
Yep, absolutely.
Has nothing to do with reading a watch.
Nope.
Right? Like I can see when a class is over. Kids can see when the class is over, but we're still doing these archaic things that were created in the 1900s. And then adding these other ridiculous things that go fly in the face of any kind of individuality, any kind of differentiated instruction. It's crazy. One thing I wanted to ask you about as well was the mental health component, because you've touched on it a couple of times. I find, particularly in girls, often in boys as well, but even more so in girls, when any of these learning issues are not addressed, it turns into really serious mental health issues by the time they're in their mid-teens. Do you see that as well?
Oh, absolutely. What you've got is you've got kids who are desperately trying to learn independence and build their own lives. And that naturally causes friction with the adults whose jobs it are to hold them accountable, right?
Yes.
I'm responsible to make my own choices. I should decide when I go to bed. I would love to give you that freedom. But if I give you that freedom, you're going to be up till 3 a.m. playing Minecraft, because Minecraft is a lot more fun than homework. And then you'll be exhausted the next day. You'll have a meltdown in gym class. You'll punch somebody. You'll get in-school suspension. I mean, there's a clear line. And yes, that version's a little doom and gloom. But I don't think it's wrong, right? So there's this fundamental tension that exists. And I tell parents all the time, in high school, your role is going to shift to sort of a guide on the side rather than the sage on stage, right? It's like, you do this and things will go well. It's like, you gotta let your kids make mistakes. And if that means that they say they're going to a sleepover and they're not going to a sleepover, right? They're going to a woods party and they come back reeking of gin. Like in the morning, it's like, hey, this is what a hangover feels like. And I don't want you to lie to me anymore because I'm smarter than you think. And I was also once a teen. Right? We
were just having that conversation the other night. I was saying, how dumb do they think I am?
I mean, it's wild, Yeah. And it's one of those things that, I think parents try and deal with that discomfort by overcorrecting to buddy. Like, I'm not a regular mom, I'm a cool mom, right? Mean Girls is back.
Yes.
It's the sort of thing, like your kids need more boundaries more structure, just enacted in a way that's humane and adapted to the shifting needs of what your kids are giving you. Right. You wouldn't parent as a 15-year-old like a 5-year-old, right? You and I, we both have kids at very different ages, right? I'm sure you don't parent your high school kid like I parent my 5-year-old, right? But the things that are the same, unconditional love, making sure they're safe, pushing them to do better, those things never change. But I'm not going to give my daughter the amount of freedom you'd give your high schooler, because that's not appropriate.
And sometimes it's not appropriate to give high schoolers a tremendous amount of freedom either. I think kids are always looking for those bumpers, as you said, like they're looking for those guardrails, and they're always testing to see where they are. That's all they're doing, and, there's nothing to take personally, because they are just testing to see where those guardrails are. And for different children, those guardrails are in different locations, because some kids at 15 can handle pretty significant decisions, and some act like a 5-year-old sometimes, so you have to figure that out with your child. But if the goal is to gain control over them, no matter what, it's not going to work. It's going to blow up in your face at some point. And I also think that it's easy for us to overlook, particularly neurodivergent children who are gifted or quote unquote smart. I think it's easy to overlook those pieces and say, but they're too smart. Like they shouldn't have any mental health issues, or this is ridiculous. It just gets blown up. And I'm glad we're when I was growing up, it was, you weren't allowed to have feelings, right? There was that was not a thing.
Black boxes, right?
Right. Suck it up, walk it off, whatever you got to do. And I'm glad that we're way more accepting of that. And I think it has taken a big leap since COVID too. I'm always trying to look at something positive that came out of COVID. And I think that we can't ignore the mental health component anymore. But I think it is, unfortunately, for neurodivergent kids, sometimes put off to the side, because you're thinking there are these other areas that are going well. So why would they? And as you said, that masking that, if you're being told enough that you should be fine, you realize you should act fine.
Yeah.
And if you have that capacity, you do.
Yeah.
So for your kids that you work with, and it is interesting because, talking about just your journey, I feel like we've got to, touch on everything. But can you tell me a little bit about what the Neurodiversity Collective is about and what your goals are? What happens there?
So it's a group of practitioners who center our interventions and our advocacy through the neurodivergent lens. We meet people where they are, and we craft solutions that make sense for people with different brains, and that means educationally, socially, emotionally, psychologically. Mental health for a gifted 12-year-old does not look like mental health for a neurotypical 12-year-old, nor should it, right? It's just that's, I say this parents all the time, like if your 12-year-old is 6'8" and you have them playing baseball, you might want to see if basketball or volleyball exists, right? Like you figure out where your kid is. And if your kid says, no, I really want to keep playing baseball, cool, do it, right? Go with God, my child, right? It's the sort of thing where, we center that, and then we try to be as holistic as possible. We talk about dating, we talk about education, we talk about exercise and diet. A lot of neurodivergent people have eating challenges, right? Not like eating disorders, but sensory issues around food, limited food preferences. How do you get someone with food sensitivities to have enough nutrients, right?
Yeah.
That's what we do, right? We cast the widest net. And I, because I work primarily with kids, I have a lot of really strong educational people on my team to help kids study, to help kids figure out how to make things work for them through differentiation, through acceleration, and give them a guide to navigate the bumps in the road that inevitably come up. All in the sense of preparing them for a world that may not be friendly, that may be actively hostile to them. But if you come with experience and loaded for bear, you got a better chance of making your own way, right? The seeds we plant now, we want to be the garden that grows in their 20s, right? And, and increasingly what we see is kids survive, but not all of them do, right? But if you survive wildly traumatized, then it's going to take your whole 20s to undo that trauma.
Right.
To then start your life in your 30s. I mean, it's just, I tell my kids all the time, why wait to feel better? Why wait to build the skills, have the support, find the community? You know, I mean, if you want to do that now, then I'm going to do everything in my power to do that now, because I guess if we had an ethos, it would be, we live things that are therapeutic in addition to therapy, right? If you plug a kid who wants to do live action role play and you find them a LARP society, that has a major positive impact on their mental health in a way that taking your Zoloft or seeing your therapist could never do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we want to invest in that stuff. We must invest in that stuff. And when adults push back on me, I tell you this, what's the thing you look forward to the most this week? I'm like, then it's not The Office.
Right.
So it's not, right. Like, tell me on Thursday nights, I get the girls together and we watch The Bachelor. I'm like, right. Does that have anything to do with your job? Does that have anything to do with your partner or your kids? It's a thing you're choosing, pursuing, and enjoying because you made those choices. And we should never take that away from people. And I would even argue we need to center it more in that stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I love that. Do you consult with schools too? Do you ever go in and be like generally and say, this is how you do this stuff?
Oh, I mean, more and more I'm doing that because I find if I work with, Bobby's family in XYZ school, I'm helping Bobby's family. If I talk to XYZ school, I can help every kid in that school, right? I throw, it's throwing a pebble in a pond versus throwing a boulder in a pond, so, I love when schools reach out to me and say, can you come out and watch what we do? Can you give us strategies to teach these kids better or do social emotional better? And I model the same sort of neurodivergent centric practice, meeting people where they are when I work with schools or even companies. Companies are reaching out to me now too and saying,
oh, interesting.
How do we serve these people better? Like, well, what are you doing right now? I don't care if you're doing nothing because you called me, so you've automatically done more than zero.
Right. Yeah. Well, and as a teacher, at least the teachers I always worked with, if they could find a way to make life a little easier for themselves, they were in. If they could learn something new or a new strategy or a new way to address the diversity of brains in their classroom, they were more than willing to learn. And I do think a lot of schools, or a lot of teachers would prefer to go this direction. I think a lot of teachers, I always say to kids, to parents about their students, the team working with your child is usually not the problem. It's their hands being tied by so many other things. It's not that teacher. It's not that provider. They want to be doing right by your child, but they either don't have the resources, they don't have the time, or they've flat out been told they're not spending any more money. So, I think that holistically, as you were saying earlier, if we can get more of these philosophies into the classroom and not just for Johnny, that will serve, as you said, all students. And there'll be a lot less need for special education, because special education is just, you're getting a special education. You don't learn the way that is being taught. So you're getting something special. And I'm glad that lane has widened. And I'm doing great hand gestures that no one can see. But it used to be.
They are really great hand gestures, though. Really top notch.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But it used to be very narrow, and that has widened greatly, which is wonderful because it's only helped teachers and students. But we do still have a long way to go in that level of differentiation. So when someone listens to this and they're like, I got to talk to Dr. Matt. He has to come talk to my school. I need to talk to him about getting my kid evaluated. How do they find you?
So I'm very Googleable. I have a very Googleable last name, like Dr. Matt Zakreski. Between the podcast I'm on and my website and all the talks in person I do. But the easiest way to get me is to go to the neurodiversitycollective.com, fill out the contact form. Me or somebody on my team will get back to you as soon as possible. And it's the sort of thing that I love when people contact me. There's a lot of different hats I wear, from the therapy to the IQ testing and the talks, the podcasts. I had a school reach out to me just the other day from a different podcast I gave. And, I'm going to fly to Kansas City, Missouri in 2 months and do a whole day workshop out there, right? That fires me up. I love doing that because, to echo what you said, I've never met a school that doesn't want to do well by its kids.
Right.
Right. those decisions that were the ways we fall short almost always come from admin decisions that are based on some sort of policy that is maybe well-intended, but funding being what it is, right? Yeah. You go to a classroom, the vast majority of teachers want to do well by their kids and will take whatever resources they can to do better. And that's why I focus on my stuff being free.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's not free for me to come to your school. I love it. You can't do that. Yeah. I got to keep my lights on. But I mean, if a teacher calls me and says, I need to teach my kids social emotional learning, I will send them my PowerPoints because it's
great.
The thing. I want them to have what I have. And I will come out there and train you how to do it. I will work with you. I will make that happen because we all want to do better by our kids, by these kids. And if I can offer you a roadmap to do so, it would be my great pleasure to be able to do that.
Well, and I think you and I, again, we think very much alike. And I, for me, if I could make sure that every parent who walked into an IEP meeting knew what they were doing, I would do it. It's a lofty goal, but it's there. And I think you very similarly would like every teacher walking into their classroom to know what they're doing and help alleviate some of their strain as well as the students. So I can see that coming through in you, and it is not as easy as it sounds, but I love that that's what you do. And I will have all of your contact information and the website in my show notes. So if you're driving right now and listening to us and thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to figure out who Dr. Matt is, when you get home, go to the show notes and I will have all of his information there. And thank you so much for joining me today. This has really been helpful and enlightening. And I'm sure that my audience is going to feel the same way.
Well, and you're so easy to talk to. So let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You will be back.
Yay.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Please don't forget to follow this podcast so you don't miss any new episodes, and leave a review when you have a chance. If there's anything you want to hear about or comment on, please go to my Facebook page, Special Ed on Special Ed, and find me there. I'll see you next time here on Special Ed on Special Ed. Have a fabulous day. The views expressed in this episode are those of the speakers at the time of the recording and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company, or even that individual today.